The world of business has changed, so we've changed everything with software-defined interconnection, reduced complexity, improved performance, greater flexibility, lower connectivity costs. All with a simple-to-use platform that makes this feel like this. It's effortless and fast, predictable and secure. It's self-provisioning, automated, spin-up connections and flex bandwidth on demand, and only pay for what you use. All this within a global community that shares, collaborates, and grows together. Take control, cut complexity, make interconnecting effortless with Console Connect.
Aloha, this is Mahialani with PTC. Thank you for attending today's session in PTC's webinar series, Frictionless Business, sponsored by PCCW Global. We now turn the time over to John Atkin of RBC Capital Markets.
Good day, everybody. I'm John Atkin. I lead the communications infrastructure investment research effort at RBC. I'm based in San Francisco, and pleased to have a global panel for this month's PTC webinar series focused on communications infrastructure, current viewpoints. We're going to have Tesh Durvasula, past president and CEO of CyrusOne, Joshi, executive chairman of AtlasEdge and former chief financial officer of Interaction, Dave Newitt, CEO of Yondr, and Rangu Salgame, chairman and CEO of Princeton Digital. What I'd like to do is hand it off to each of you, starting with Tesh, and then Josh, Dave, and then Rangu. Brief perspectives, your professional background, and maybe starting off with you, Tesh, kind of the roles you played at CyrusOne and elsewhere in the industry, and how have you been spending time since then? So welcome, Tesh, and then we'll move on to Josh, Dave, and Rangu.
Thank you, Jonathan, and it's an honor to be with such distinguished panelists this morning or this afternoon, depending on your time zone. I'm old enough now that I get to call all of my mistakes experience. So over the past 25 years, I've been in fiber optics, interconnection, and data centers. My roles at CyrusOne most recently started as chief commercial officer prior to our IPO. We took it public in 2013. I was part of the management team that did that. Then went from chief commercial officer to president of Europe, helped our expansion into 5 countries in Europe, and it now represents roughly 20% of the business of CyrusOne. And the last 6 months was as CEO of the business after Mr. Wojtaszek left. And how have I been spending my time? There is no shortage of liquidity that is seeking to invest in this space, in our sector broadly. And I say that from a planetary perspective. Every region of the globe has got activity in it. And I've been very interested in introducing that capital to the right opportunity. So.
Fantastic. Josh, welcome.
Hello, John, and yeah, thank you. Likewise, I'm very privileged and honored to be here and with this panel. My background, I've been away from the industry for the last 3 years, but prior to that, I had, a lot of gray hair being built on living and working within the digital infrastructure industry since the mid-90s. I spent a little bit of time with a company called Telecity in Europe, and my focus really has been Europe throughout my career. And then more recently, I spent just over a decade at Interaction, building a formidable business with a formidable team and leader. And then I left, and more recently, as Tesh said, I think that there's been extraordinary, over the last 3 years, there's been an extraordinary growth in the sector and extraordinary opportunities. And when Liberty Global and Digital Bridge came to me and suggested, that there was a particular thing that they were trying to achieve and that they wanted to explore, the prospect of being part of AtlasEdge was just simply too good to resist. And they drugged me out of retirement not kicking and screaming. I was running quite hard, actually. And I'm really looking forward to what we're trying to do at AtlasEdge, backed with, I think, some formidable assets, a great team that I'm not yet ready to announce, with significant ambition and backing. So looking forward to it, John.
So more to watch in that space. Dave, tell us about yourself and what you've been doing and what's happening at Yondr.
Yeah, thanks for the invite to join the panel. I started differently to the other guy. So I started in oil and gas, which was quite different. That really helped me understand how engineering and technology could join together to provide efficient, safe solutions. And then I started in data centers in about 2005. I was always quite amazed the lack of innovation in data centers. It really, really shocked me coming from an industry where innovation was the watchword and had constant change. I didn't really see that in data centers. Over the years from 2005, built hundreds of megawatts and watched CapEx, OpEx, build times increase and not really decrease, and didn't really see the drive to efficiency. So we started Yondr to start thinking differently about the industry. How can we collaborate? How can we do things that are different from the norm? We're a relatively new kid on the block, but I think we can come in. We've got a great team. We can come in. We can make a difference. I think the industry needs to change. I think we've got to look at things like sustainability, diversity, belonging, and inclusion, and we need to make it a more inclusive, better industry. I think with collaboration amongst the parties, we can do that a lot better.
Thank you for that. And lastly, Rangu, welcome.
Thank you, John. Good to be here, and good to meet my colleagues here, an esteemed panel that you put together. Good to meet all of you and be here. So a little history of PTC and my personal background. I've been in the kind of the telecom infrastructure space or internet infrastructure space throughout my career. Spent over a decade at Verizon. I'm from New York. Don't hold that against me. Spent quite a bit of time at Cisco and affiliates of these two companies before spending some time at Tata Communications, a company that I'm sure our colleagues here and PTC audience knows well. They're running the submarine cable and other parts of the business. One of the areas we had was a data center portfolio. And what we did there over 3-4 years is transfer that business to hyperscale business and the Asia part, and sold it to Temasek, STT, about a little over 5 years ago. And then after the deal was completed, I left along with my co-founder of Princeton, where we started this company just about 4 years ago with the thesis that there's a gap in the market to create a pan-Asia data center company focused on hyperscalers at the quality and the standards of a global player, but in Asia for global hyperscalers out of Asia. So with that thesis, we got started. We have been, from early days, from a formative days, we've been backed by Warburg Pincus, a New York-based private equity firm that I'm sure most of the folks know. And then, they have put in significant capital. And about a year ago or so, we had Ontario Teachers pension plan from Toronto. They came in as additionally institutional investor last year. And today we have built a portfolio of about 19 data center projects across 5 countries, Japan being our most latest entry that we announced about a month ago. John.
So I'm going to stay with you for the next couple of minutes, Rangu. So you mentioned Japan. Maybe give us a bit of a more comprehensive snapshot. Which countries and metros do you currently operate? Which are the biggest contributors to your business at present among those?
Sure. Before Japan, we've been in 4 countries, John. We have headquarters in Singapore. We have an operation in Singapore. We bought an asset out of IO, which is a US company that most of us know. We bought the Singapore business, and then we're building a campus out there. So that's a major presence in Singapore. We have a significant operation in China. So we have a little joint venture with 21 Vianet, where we have some stabilized assets. Then we are building our own portfolio of projects in China, which is in Shanghai, and outside Shanghai, a couple of other projects. So major one in Shanghai. Then we announced Nanjing, about Nanjing and Nantong, which is about 100 megawatt combined project. So those that we are doing projects in Beijing and Shenzhen as well. So those are the two locations in China, which is today our largest part of our portfolio in terms of scale and number of megawatts that are in operation and filled by customers. Then the other market is Indonesia, where we have 5 locations, but 3 of them being in the Jakarta market. There's 5 assets we bought out of XL Axiata, which is a telecom operator in Indonesia. And then we're expanding in Jakarta. We're about to start construction of a new project in Jakarta. That's going to be a 22 megawatt project in Jakarta. And then we announced earlier this year our entry into India, where we announced a 48 megawatt project that we are coming out with in Mumbai. That's a first project as a market entry in India. And then we are doing other projects in India, particularly in Chennai, which is the southern part of India. Then Japan is our latest one, which is in Tokyo. And that is a 100 megawatt project we announced in Saitama City, which is north of Tokyo, and building that out. So that's going to be our starting point in Tokyo, in Japan. So a lot more activities we anticipate to do in Japan. So that's kind of our portfolio. Yeah, please, John.
So yeah, a lot to grow within that existing footprint. Or do you possibly add more countries? Are you considering adding to the footprint or growing within the footprint?
Both, John. So we are planning and investing significantly in all these 4 countries, and now more in Japan as well, which will deepen in these markets, mainly around the large metropolitan areas where our customers are anticipating us to invest and grow with them. And then new markets as well. So there are a few other economies that are quite attractive in Japan, in Asia, that our customers believe that we can bring a lot of value for them. So there are markets like Korea and other countries in Asia that we have been actively looking at. So that will expand our portfolio in newer markets in Asia.
So you have a very good kind of regional view, being the corporate office in Singapore, which has been the most restrictive on permitting of late. Where do things stand there, and how would you kind of contrast the permitting environment in the countries where you currently operate in terms of level of difficulty?
Yeah, I think Singapore, being an island nation and the commitment to Paris Accord, they had to take stock of their power issues in the country, and they did get into a moratorium a little while ago. But we anticipate that moratorium opening up in Singapore, so we are expecting a lot of changes that will come, which will favor the industry for growth perspective. So we got in at a time that we had a good asset to start with, a lot of capacity to expand into. So we have been well positioned in Singapore, but the country is going through its policy review. So overall, if you look at from a macro perspective, Singapore did kind of a little bit what Netherlands and Amsterdam did in Netherlands, and I think they've come out of it in a pretty strong way. We anticipate Singapore to do the same. Now, if you look at some other countries in the region, whether it's India, China, I think all of these countries, the important part is the policymakers in these countries in Asia are extremely committed to digitization. So that agenda is not going off the table for these countries. So that on one hand, and then dealing with power issues and carbon issues, they are trying to reevaluate and how to bring more effective power solutions to the market. So we believe there's not going to be a detrimental impact on the demand for data centers and the data center industry to grow. So we expect the market to grow in double digits or even into 20+% growth year over year in this market. So pretty excited. We have not seen any slowdown in ability to drive growth in this market. And each of the countries, as you may know, have different approach to policy approach to power. So some areas it's more provincial, more local. Some areas it's largely driven by market forces. So you have to work through the local market conditions to make sure that you kind of a little bit ahead of the curve to make your investments in the right kind of visibility of where the power market is going in those markets. So we kind of our teams on the ground in these markets bring those kind of expertise and knowledge to be able to make decisions around the site location, site selection in a way that we minimize our execution risk.
So I want to turn over to Dave, who's developing scale sites. But before I do that, the 2 biggest countries where you operate, India and China. India, you've got data sovereignty. Where do things stand there in terms of potentially spurring even more demand? And then China, perhaps it's a headwind. I'd be interested in your take. But given all the government scrutiny that's been taking place of internet companies in that country, how is that affecting the data center business from where you sit? Rangu. So India and then China. Yeah.
Oh,
so,
I'm sorry. I thought you were Dave. My apologies. So the question was, I completely.
So data sovereignty in India, where do things stand?
Yeah. So I think if you look at the data sovereignty issues that all countries are dealing with, we do believe that there's going to be a lot of legislative moves that will happen in this country from a data sovereignty as well as data localization perspective. But if you step back from a data center industry perspective, John, either way the legislative kind of models evolve, we believe it's a very attractive direction for data center because there will be a need for a lot more local data centers. There will be continued need for hub data centers like in Singapore, other locations. But in-country data centers development will get a lot more impetus by the way that the countries are moving in terms of localization as well as sovereignty of data. So it's a very positive trend, no matter what kind of the steps each country take, which is going to be not necessarily in tandem, but the directionally we believe is good for the data center industry.
Great. And then, so Dave, over to you, building scale sites in a number of different places. Maybe just a little bit of sense as to how you're financed, and then what are the geographies of focus currently?
Yeah, so we're wholly owned by Cathexis, which is a family office out of Houston. That's really, really good because it enables us to be flexible and make very quick decisions. And then we launched in EMEA, started in the traditional markets of Amsterdam, London, Dublin, Frankfurt, Paris. And then we're looking to grow into, we see massive growth in Eastern Europe. And then we will attempt to solve, and I say attempt to solve, the Africa cloud issue and work with partners to solve that as well. Then we went over and we launched in APAC, and we've got offices in the traditional markets, Japan, Singapore, Jakarta, and then we had a joint venture with Everstone in India, as we've seen a huge requirement for growth in India, and our customers are looking for something. They're looking for the reliability. They're looking for that global perspective with an Indian slant on it. So we feel that the JV with Everstone gives us that. And then we've launched in America. Again, started in the more traditional states of North Virginia, Canada, but we're also seeing a lot of requests for places in South America, in Brazil, Uruguay, places like that, as the internet grows throughout the globe.
Probably better to ask you where aren't you going, I suppose, given the massive scale that you've just outlined. But what are the currently announced and underway development projects? Any kind of ready for service states, and then are you in service anywhere at this point? If you can give us kind of a current snapshot and where things look maybe a year from now.
Yeah, so we're in all the traditional markets, as I said, and we've got space and RFS states in all the traditional markets. I think we see the growth in working with our customers in the more difficult to serve markets. So Eastern Europe, South America, places in India, we see massive growth opportunities, and a lot of our customers they deliver themselves. So what we're looking to do is augment their self-delivery, not compete against, but augment their self-delivery.
So your corporate material references an engineering-led company, and you've kind of talked about different ways of doing business, but what more detail can you kind of provide on what you mean by that? And you also talked about product segmentation. Maybe that's worth touching on: microblock, metroblock, hyperblock.
Yeah, so engineering touches everything we do, and we think it's important to be targeted with our engineering solutions. In our sector, you do get a lot of over-engineered solutions that are just not efficient. So I think now we've got to look at engineering. And we've always got to ask that question: why are we doing that? Why did we do that in the past? What can we change to be more efficient? how do we reduce the PUE, right? How do we reduce the carbon, the embedded carbon in a building, right? And look at these things that are going to move the industry on. That's where we view ourselves as an engineering-led business.
And then there was the product segmentation that I kind of alluded to. Sorry if we talked over each other, but MetroBlock, Hyperblock, Microblock, what types of customers, use cases, locations are you sort of targeting for those different initiatives?
Yeah, so Microblock's a quick deployment of under 10 megawatts. So if somebody needs to be into an area quickly or they don't want to commit to true hyperscale, we've got a solution for them. A Metrobox, you're looking at areas with high land costs, metropolitan areas with high land costs. Normally, with the difficulty of the power, talked about Amsterdam and Singapore earlier, you've got to come up with different solutions to solve that. And then Hyperblock is your traditional hyperscale campus, done very, very efficiently to minimize PUE and maximize the ability for our customers to feel at home in one of our locations.
Last question for you, and it's kind of similar to what I asked Rangu at the end around permitting, but we can kind of broaden it to include, site selection, construction. A lot has to fall in place before you actually have a project underway and are able to develop. You mentioned a number of large markets and even some smaller ones in terms of where you are growing. What has been the most difficult market or markets to enter? Is it Japan or is it? Yeah. So go ahead.
Each market has its own little nuances. The way that we've approached it is people always approach site selection, design, permitting, construction on an end-to-end basis. We look at that differently. Why do you need to approach them on an end-to-end basis? Why can you not use technology to do test fits? Why can we not engage with the permitting consultants prior to owning the land? So we try not to be traditional in our thought process. There's always going to be challenges. We find it's definitely easy to permit in the US than it is in a lot of places in Europe, and some of the nuances of working in different countries in Asia. We need to make sure that we've got the localized talents on the ground to deliver on that. But we do view these as a challenge. We do work in a great industry, and we must remind ourselves of that when the challenges of permitting, of construction, the different challenges get thrown at us. We do work in a good industry, and as I tell my children, we're building the cloud. So we're doing something for the people of tomorrow.
Excellent. So Josh, over to you. AtlasEdge, highly distributed, low latency edge infrastructure. Tell us a little bit about what that means. And I know it's a very rapidly evolving situation, but give us a little bit of a flavor for what's to come.
Well, thank you, John. And I just find it interesting, our industry and the way that it's been developing. And, are we a sort of real estate industry? Are we a network industry? How is it that we're coming together, and what is it that we're trying to do? And at the end of the day, over the last 25 years, what I've seen is, this increased development in the way that consumers consume data. And AtlasEdge has come from the genesis of, I think, two very impressive parents. You've got Liberty Global on one side, which is perhaps one of the world's leading sort of converged video, broadband, and communication companies, and then you've got Digital Bridge that for something like the last 30 years has been investing successfully in digital infrastructure. And both of those, what you've got is a meaningful growth in the way that data is consumed. And when you think about data centers and when you think about the way that that will develop, yes, of course, you need the infrastructure and you need to build, buildings. But in truth, what we're really trying to do is actually to locate for our customers their workloads in the cheapest possible location, and yet at the same time maintain an acceptable level of service or performance on their workloads. And so if you think about what AtlasEdge is trying to do, is to say, well, there are going to be a growing number of workloads that actually where performance will be the prime driver for delivering services to their own customers. And that performance will need to be managed in a location which is probably closer to where that workload was created. And, there are different tools that will fit and serve for different solutions. And so AtlasEdge's particular solution in a highly distributed environment. And, bringing these two entities together to form, the joint venture, which, by the way, hasn't actually got regulatory approval yet. So hopefully that regulatory approval will come through by the end of this month. But with that approval, there'll be over 100 sites that will come together across 4 countries in Europe with significant ambition to grow the scale of the business over time in some depth. And it's going to be an entirely different kind of data center business than perhaps we've seen in the past.
So on that topic, having been at Interaction and Telecity/Redbus, there's also been Equinix active in Europe through, IX Europe and so forth, and some of their organic growth. Those are arguably interconnection and edge-oriented strategies to varying degrees. So how does AtlasEdge contrast with some of those predecessor approaches?
Well, I think it contrasts in 2 ways, John. One is that in many ways, AtlasEdge is an evolution. But when compared to what Equinix and Interaction and others in the industry are doing, it's actually a significant contrast. And the reason for this is if you go to the whole concept of the way data is managed by, whether it's the cloud or by enterprises, there are oceans of data out there. And, my colleagues, Dave and Rangu, they're going to do a fantastic job, and Tesh, actually managing those oceans of data, providing appropriate homes. But equally, as with every ocean, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of rivers that feed them. And there is a real need to actually be able to provide the support at the beginning of that journey of that data to actually manage the workload's journey through. Now, I'm not talking about active management, but I'm talking about actually connecting those oceans through the rivers back to the source. And there is a real need, in my view, of actually taking what is existing infrastructure today, which sits within, telco environments or carrier environments, but equally also within traditional colo environments, and actually bringing the cloud closer to their customers and enterprises closer to the cloud based on performance requirements. And that's the difference. And the evolution is an evolution of that community, of the cloud and enterprise community that I think, both Equinix and Interaction, excelled at globally and continue to excel at. I think leveraging that experience into the edge, I think is really how we will differentiate. I mean, it made me smile when Dave said that, the nano blocks are less than 10 megawatts. If that's the case, then what we're trying to do are Higgs boson blocks. They're a different scale, but very much more, hundreds of locations with real density. And that's the difference. And it's going to require a different type of engineering, a different type of engagement with the customer. And as I said, so there's a really fascinating, interesting journey ahead for AtlasEdge and what we're trying to achieve.
Connectivity, fiber, what role does that play? Are you partnering with affiliated companies, relying on just kind of the available commercial partners that you have? Any kind of thoughts that you can share at this point?
Well, it doesn't surprise you to know that both Liberty Global and Digital Bridge have got hundreds of thousands of miles of connectivity and fiber, and we're going to be able to leverage those assets that our owners have. But also, I think there's two parts to this. One, the success will be scale, and I think in any data center business right now, scale matters. But scale can be measured in two ways. Scale can be measured, in terms of sort of geographic scale and depth in terms of the volume of megawatts that you're going to have in a particular location. Both matter, I think. What the network will do, and actually accessing that network and accessing the network node locations, is going to be able to bring the sort of depth of scale of hundreds of megawatts of hyperscale capacity to the geographic scale through multi-tier locations and into the various cities. And so, to go back to your question, does interconnect and network matter? Oh, yes. Oh, yes, it matters a great deal. And in any situation, when in any of our data centers, when these workloads are being managed, they're not being managed in isolation, right? They are being managed for a reason, to connect to a consumer of that data, that workload, and to engage. And it could be in an extremely dynamic way, where certain parts of the workloads are packaged up and dealt with at different parts of the network. And so they're very complex solutions required. And I think that AtlasEdge will fit in to, I think, a part of the industry that really hasn't taken off. It reminds me of where we were right at the beginning in 2007, thinking about cloud back at Interaction. And so I think we're right at the beginning of a very long journey when it comes to thinking about data centers, and particularly the way that the data will grow at the edge.
Excellent. So Tesh, I want to turn it over to you. You've heard, the predecessor panelists talk a lot about a number of different business models, a number of different geographies. From where you sit and given who you've talked to, whether it's capital providers, operating companies, where do you see capital being deployed most actively in terms of types of business models, geographies? Anything kind of come to mind as you've heard the other panelists kind of opine on this?
So first off, congratulations to all of our panelists. They have great aspirations, and they're solving lots of great problems and bringing solutions to areas of the market that really need it. So bravo to that. And I think, Jonathan, just for everyone at PTC and everyone, it's an honor to be on this panel. But more importantly, I think it's really an honor to be part of this industry. David mentioned it, Josh mentioned it, sitting from the sidelines for 3 years and then wanting to come back, and Rangu is doing it in great markets. You can't go through a global pandemic like we did and not understand how well the infrastructure held up through it all. There are companies recording record earnings. There are companies doing all sorts of transactions. There are people, kids, children. Everyone was impacted, and our infrastructure held up. And it is a testament to the people in this room. It's a testament to the people at PTC. It's a testament to the industry globally as a whole that we are continuing to invest capital in the infrastructure that really matters the most, digital infrastructure. So I thought I'd just start off with that. Now, answer specifically to your question, it really depends. you are seeing 3 or 4 different types of capital run into the market, and I'll kind of bucket them, if you will. So the traditional type of vector that has come in now is traditional real estate. They were probably the last entrant of coming in. It was more tech investors or hybrid tech/real estate investors. Now you're seeing that group come in, and they're looking for, a different return profile. That pool of capital is North America, maybe Europe, and that is looking for, hey, we haven't done any data centers. We're now know it's a very formidable industry. It's been around for 2 decades, and we're going to come in there. That return profile, as you can imagine, is different than folks who are looking to say, nope, but there's another pool of capital. It's the established growth markets. Let's talk about Asia. Let's talk about India, Singapore, China. We know that there's 2.6 billion people between India and China. We understand that they're going to continue to grow. We've been investing other types of infrastructure, railways, airports, people. India specifically is so vital to the IT stack. In the US, in terms of development teams, every major organization has some development going on in India. So that part of the capital stack and going there. And then the third bucket, I would say, is the emerging markets. These are the folks who understand that what is difficult to do is often gives you the most outsized return, but the appetite for Africa, parts of Latin America, parts of Asia is not nearly as strong as the first 2 buckets that I already described, but it's there. And we're talking billions of dollars that want to go there. And what you're seeing is that there is an alignment between all of the customers that we're focusing on, not just hyperscalers, enterprises, banks, institutions are trying to bring more services to these areas and those different pools of capital. And it's an exciting time when there is no shortage of capital, zero. It's a question of, do you have the right idea and you have the right talent? And, I speak for, I think, everyone in the industry. Welcome back, Joshi. You're one of the best, and we're happy to see you here.
So as you, presumably just temporarily, Tesh, left the industry, there was a certain kind of demand profile that you were seeing in terms of large deals. Having been on the sidelines for a little bit, has anything surprised you around how that has continued, or in locations where it's continued, whether it's emerging opportunities or established markets?
Not surprised, but I was probably most impressed with the pace, right? Through the pandemic, the pace continued, and you're seeing the pace almost increase right now. So what used to be David called it a sub 10 megawatt installation in Europe that was kind of the standard by a lot of folks. That's quickly going to 10 to 20 and larger and campus formats. That was probably a 40 to 48 month lag from the US to Europe. My guess is the lag between Europe and Asia will be less. They'll get to 20 and 36 type megawatt deployments faster than they did in Europe and in Asia. And so that pace of being able to consolidate and innovate faster is definitely happening. And I think it becomes really interesting in the emerging markets because we were stuck or anchored in some traditional biases around terrestrial networks and being next to an interconnection site. If you had a blank slate, would you build more towers and edge data centers and bypass terrestrial altogether to get further deployment and further reach for your applications? Or would you stay tied to terrestrial networks and fiber optics? And I think most of the panel here is probably has a major focus of their business plan or a ancillary focus on exactly that. How do they attack the other markets? And our customers want that. They don't want, as you see, they continue to think differently, and they want to get theirs also.
Got it. And then maybe lastly, as you look at a lot of the emerging platforms today, just countless numbers of new initiatives across various regions. Assuming demand is there, what kind of stands in the way of success? What are some of the risk factors to keep in mind?
I think it's really comes down to three major topics, and one David hit on, innovation. I'm proud to be part of an industry that used to cost $25 million a megawatt to build a data center, 2 decades ago, and now it's less than 20% of that, and that's fantastic. But you have to continue to innovate around the next driver, right? So it's emissions, it's workplace initiatives. So that innovation has to continue to come up, and the folks who don't innovate are going to struggle, and the ones who do are going to continue to do well. So that's kind of number one, because our customers are demanding that. Number two, and it gets a little more also macro, but micro level, is commercial values versus and ventures versus citizenship. It is absolutely, 25 years ago, we didn't talk about it, and 5 years ago, it wasn't mentioned. But 3 years ago, if you were at the Davos conference, you had 5 or 6 impact funds, and last year, before 2019, before the pandemic, everyone was talking about ESG. But it wasn't just about ESG; it was about overall citizenship and what you can do with it at a global level. And if your company isn't doing it, you realize that our customers are being their employees. Amazon now employs 1 million people, and they operate in 100 countries. You're going to watch everyone follow suit. It is, how do they match up their commercial goals with their citizenship goals? And then the last thing, and you're seeing it happen everywhere now, is the tension between kind of management and talent. Is the companies that can have the best, the most dynamic policies around that are going to win. And it's affecting every industry, and our industry will be no different. And so where do your people work? How do they work? How are they getting paid? How are you incentivizing them? That pendulum has swung quickly post-pandemic, and I think the companies who have the most dynamic policies around that will prosper in the next quarter of a century.
So I want to go back to Dave. You were nodding your head on a couple of topics, so feel free to chime in. But one thing that kind of strikes me is you are, all of you are rapidly growing, but given the variety of jurisdictions in which Yondr is operating and establishing a platform, I imagine a lot of hiring going on. I mean, you recently hired, one of the construction heads from CyrusOne, actually, who comes from that background. But what are the challenges around human capital and kind of the needs that you're mindful of? Are you needing to hire from within the sector, from outside the sector? What's your approach to that?
So we look at it in a twofold basis. One, we've got to bring more different people to the sector. You look at the sector at the moment, it isn't diverse as we want it to be. So we work with universities, we work with different institutions like the infrastructure masons, right, to look at how do we bring young talent? How does a 16-year-old turn around and go, I want to go into the data center industry? It interests me. And I want to build data centers, or I want to build the infrastructure. So that's the first challenge. And then the second challenge is about, Tesh mentioned it, getting people that want to be in the game for the long term. right, that understand our customers' needs, understand that this is going to be a process that takes 5, 10, 15 years, right? And is part of that and accepts that the challenges that the industry brings, because it does bring challenges. It's enjoyable, right? But anybody that turns around to me and says, oh, every data center build they ever did went really, really smoothly and it gets operated perfectly, is definitely not telling me the truth. So we do have challenges, and we've got to have people that come in and enjoy them challenges, that think differently to the way that we've thought in the past, because that's not always the way, and solve things in different ways. And I think at the moment, if we can start, we've definitely brought people in from different industries. The energy industry, I think, is closely linked to the data center industry, and we can learn a lot from. The manufacturing industry, the way that we're doing construction, and the way that we need to start manufacturing buildings. We can bring in talent from other industries that can definitely add to our industry.
Rangu, last word, maybe touching on some of Josh's comments about edge opportunities, the importance of connectivity. You operate in a very varied landscape within Asia Pac in terms of just the carrier infrastructure. Some of the jurisdictions extremely well fibered, others kind of more developing. But how do you kind of view edge computing, edge infrastructure opportunities on the kind of the scale that Josh is talking about within APAC?
Yeah, I think where APAC is today, I think Tesh or Josh touched on earlier, we're kind of a few years behind where North America or Europe was from an industry evolution perspective. So that means there's a massive need for customers, which are large hyperscalers, need to build out the core infrastructure in Asia, whether it's in China or India or other parts of Asia. So we're going to see still for the coming years, a lot of attention and focus on the large scale core development of core data centers that would be needed. So there is enough fiber. There's a lot of investment going on in these countries. Most of the countries are pretty competitive when it comes to fiber infrastructure being built out. So we're seeing a pretty good connectivity being a carrier neutral data center. So from an edge perspective, what Josh is doing and digital AtlasEdge is pretty leading edge. I think we will see that coming. I think it's a lot to be done and understood in that market, and we will watch what's going on in Europe and North America. And those kind of needs, workloads that Josh mentioned is the key. Right now, the workloads in Asia is still driven by what requirements are there in the core data center and serving large cloud providers and so on. But as things like IoT, autonomous vehicles, those start coming in, we are going to see kind of the workloads that Josh was touching on earlier move, or the requirements come closer to where the activities are going on from a data creation perspective, compute requirement perspective. So we see that coming, but it's still in the very early days when it comes to Asia. There's a lot to be done on the core build outs, the kind of mega scale that Tesh touched on earlier. Today we are seeing 30, 40 megawatts purchasing that's going on by hyperscalers in China as a very common thing. We sold out a 42 megawatt data center in a single stroke. And that scale is still to be happening in Asia in the coming years. India, we're going to see the same scale. Indonesia, in the next couple of years, we're going to see 20, 30 megawatt kind of scale being bought out. So there's a lot to be done in that. So we are kind of focused on that, and the customers are making us pay attention only on that part of the industry right now.
Fantastic. I think we could go another full hour if we have the time, but we are up on time. I want to thank all of you for participating. I think we had a very far-reaching discussion, and appreciate your taking the time.
Thank you, John.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.